Welcome to another episode of the Australian Retirement Podcast. Here with good friend and financial advisor from Northeast Wealth, James O'Reilly. Welcome back.
Hey, mate.
It's been a few weeks, days, coming to you live, sort of, on a Thursday.
We're live. You and I are.
Yeah, we are. Of course, always live. This isn't a bot producing this podcast for us this week. We're excited to have another Q&A session coming up. And as always, we don't look at the questions that we're going to put on each other. For anyone listened to the last episode, it ended up with some level of uncomfortableness for each of us. But what's been happening?
Well, lots. We're making big changes to portfolios for members at the moment.
Because of that interest rate cut?
Yep. And also because the US tech market is going bananas at the moment.
Yep.
So that's something that we're deleveraging out of. We've been living for a little while.
Of course.
So we're just watching NVIDIA fall off a cliff at the moment.
And I wanted to put something to you where we're both on the tools, so to speak, still meeting clients, meeting prospects every day. I hope every day, not weekends. But I'm seeing this interesting because we work obviously with 50 plus, essentially, people that are transitioning already in retirement. So it could be from 50 to 90 and even 95, as we know, because retirement continues to extend. One area we are very open, we don't specialize in, is insurance. And I know you do a bit more work in insurance. I'm interested to know, I meet quite a few people that are in their 60s, very close to retirement, still maintaining life, like a significant amount of life insurance. A lot of the time, no debt, already ready to self-fund their own retirement. Is there a point? Do you go through this very often? And is there a point? How much detail do we need? But when does that self-insurance? What do you consider when it's time to self-insure?
As early as possible. Yeah, in this context. Yeah, we this is one of the biggest challenges we have too, and one of the cruelest ironies I think about insurance, particularly for pre-retirees, is that it's incredibly expensive, and the people that
it only goes up and the cover goes down.
That's right. Yeah. And the people that are burdened to pay it are the ones that can't afford it. Because if your financial life, if at let's say 62, 63, is such that you have paid off all of your debts, you've built enough super that now the last couple of working years that you have are really just kind of, you would like to keep working rather than I absolutely need these extra few dollars. In that scenario, then you are very unlikely to need life insurance.
Yeah.
And so, of course, you've cancelled it already and you don't have you're not burdened with those big premiums. It's the people that still have the mortgage and they're trying to eke out those last few years, and their retirement is dependent on still earning income for the next few years. They're the people that have the burden of the $5,000, $10,000 and above insurance.
It can go to $50,000. I've seen $20,000 in insurance premiums in people's 60s.
Yeah. It's absolutely brutal. So at a certain point in time, the insurance becomes so prohibitive for mine that it's prohibited from the get-go, frankly. But it becomes so much so that we're constantly looking at how do we thin this? And what it means really is just helping people to be clear on the compromise.
Yeah.
So for instance, we currently have enough insurance that if you were to pass, then you'll clear the mortgage. There's a little bit of money for the kids, and the surviving spouse, for example, might have X dollars in order to ensure that transition is comfortable. But we need to be more objective here because the costs are extreme. So we're going to change that to just clearing the mortgage, subject to their comfort. And the premium is going from $6,000 to $3,500. So other times we might look at it and say, even then the premium goes from $8,000 to $5,000.
Yeah.
And so we actually need to leave a small amount of mortgage, ideally a small amount of mortgage remaining, and the surviving spouse can either downsize or can...
Your lifestyle can change.
Yeah, that's right. Can fund that mortgage themselves in the final years of their their final working years. So this is super, super difficult.
I think it's definitely a topic for a detailed conversation.
Yeah, let's do a potty about it.
With some real case study. I could bring 10, 15 to the same one.
People or case studies?
Case studies. Yeah. And where it goes wrong and where it goes right.
Yeah.
I think is the key there.
No, I'd love to do that because this is one of the hardest things.
Yeah.
Insurance just is... Good heavens, it becomes so expensive.
And it's a hard environment when so many people are told that they're underinsured. and then you're giving up insurance. It's kind of the psychological change can be difficult.
And I've paid for this all this time, and now I'm getting rid of it. Yeah.
The old endowment policies. Yep, we forget about those.
All right, let's do some Q&A.
Grill me.
Okay, so I'm going to have to thin this question out quite a bit. It's from John Bon Jovi, living on a prayer or living on home equity. I'll jump in, but again, there's a lot here, so I'm going to have to thin this out quite a bit. The question itself is a good one, though. The question relates to living off home equity. This person's in a very good financial position. They have, as he describes, geared to my eyeballs to buy a house in a blue chip suburb in Sydney. Since then, I've been working like crazy to pay it off and also making maximum contributions to boost super. Both my wife and I have a really healthy super balance. As a result, at 50, I have a house which is fully paid off, which means that the loans are matched by offset, and the value of the home has ballooned out because it's in Sydney in a really, really good suburb, to be worth about 10 million. 2 million
you said
in
million.
super. Yeah, million. I really want to emphasize that word. It's a big home value. Now, all of his assets, he's concerned that all his assets are either lifestyle or tied up until he's 60, being obviously the home and the superannuation balance. So I'm looking at retiring early, and I'm thinking about my options and how I could facilitate that. One option would be to sell the home, buy something for about 5 million, and then invest the remaining 5 million. This would be the most straightforward approach. However, I'm interested in thoughts about living off equity. So I live off the money in the offset accounts until I'm 60, and then repay the debt by selling the home at that point, or withdrawing from the super fund. Now, without getting too granular, it looks like around about $120,000 a year are their expenses. So we'll assume that over the next decade, they probably need 1.5 to 2 mil or thereabouts all up. So they probably need all of the money in offset, and at that age 60, they've paid off all the debt, and now they're basically going to soak it back the other way. So what should I do? Go.
Yeah, it's an incredibly challenging question. I will say Die with Zero, great book, but it's it's not just about retiring early. It's about putting more value on experiences and time rather than toiling away, paying off your mortgage or buying another house and paying off that mortgage.
By the way, to the listener here, I've got to put, I didn't even mention that. I've cut through. I cut through that section. So if you're thinking Drew's just gone crazy and he's answering the question, he's not. I just skipped that one.
Yeah, I think, but it is, and what I think this talks about is flexibility, and how do you find flexibility in retirement? And a part of it could be you stop working now because you burnt out because you've literally just serviced and paid off a mortgage for the last 15 years, and now you've got the opportunity and the flexibility to change. And I've seen the answer to this is it depends, and it is each person will have a different experience doing this. And as you said, yes, the simplest one would be to sell the house, and you'll probably net $5 million, and then you'd live an incredibly comfortable retirement. You could, on a basic rule of 5%, you could generate $250,000 off a $5 million portfolio of investment.
Yeah.
But this is likely your home. You've lived there for an extended period of time, and that decision can be an incredibly difficult and emotional one. And I'd suggest the only problem I see, and I've seen it work quite well, I've seen people, not that it's recommended, and this is people that have told me what they were doing, using their investment loans and lines of credit into their 80s and continue to live off them, taking their pension out once a year, essentially from superannuation, and paying off their mortgage the other side. That said, they were doing that when interest rates were 1%, not when they were 6%. So this strategy becomes increasingly expensive, and it becomes a question of drawbacks. Yes, you could do it. The drawback is you're going to be paying interest on a significant amount of debt once again, and at some point you're going to have to pay off that debt. So the few of the things I'm more going to say, be devil's advocate here. And what I always get worried about in these situations is, are you relying too much on your bank? If you don't have any other income producing assets, you only have your superannuation that you can't access yet, you're relying on the bank to allow you to keep that mortgage open, and you're funding it from your offset account. So you're still going to be servicing the loan, but you're also reducing your offset account. You're starting to get paid interest. That's fine, and it probably gives you the flexibility. It means you don't have to sell the property immediately. But at some point, you're going to be forced into selling that asset. You can't live off illiquid assets or equity forever. And I think that's the biggest thing I've seen. And it comes out in all different ways. I've had clients who basically spent 3/4 of their superannuation to renovate their house, lived off that smaller pool of superannuation, but eventually, once it was run out, they were forced to sell the house. So it's more, the risk is that the decision gets taken out of your hands at some point, whether that's access to capital, whether that's income reducing, whether it's
health events.
Yeah, exactly. So what I think is important here is maintaining control as much as you can. And maybe the ultimate outcome is you do it for a few years, try it, and then have the ability to find somewhere else you want to use it as a process rather than doing it as arbitrary decisions. So sell now, sell later, and kind of experience retirement, experience living in your house. Maybe you'll hate the house now that you're there all the time and you're not working full time anymore, because to pay off a mortgage on even if it was a $6 billion house would have been a lot of work, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
And I think, I think that's probably the biggest thing I can say. And I'm always wary when people, I don't know if we mentioned this in the question, that assuming that the house will be worth another 20% more or continue to go up in perpetuity, that you'll be able to sell it for more and that'll offset the amount that you're spending now. I think it's always difficult to assume and rely on the value of your property being higher. We're used to it in Australia because it's always been that way. But there's, what do they say? Bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. I think that's, how do you control it? How do you maximize it to your benefit versus letting these things go out of your control?
Yeah, I love that. I'd like to just add here.
Thank you.
Manny, that we're talking about expenses of $120K a year. And as you pointed out, contextualized against your net assets, those expenses are tiny.
Yeah.
Which is great. Congratulations on being in such a strong position and having those options available.
Good start.
What that tells me is that if you're 50 years old and already in that position, holding on to this property for the next 10 years, let's say, and perhaps arbitraging to try to get a higher return on the property versus, and you don't actually need to do that. It seems to me. It seems you've got more than enough. And
just a lifestyle question.
That's right. Yeah. So if we make this a lifestyle only, even if the downsizer now, it just gives you the certainty. It means that it's done. You don't have the debt. Often when I look at the strategy of trying to accumulate more, like for example, I'm going to hold on and I'm going to be just reverse mortgaging my way over the next decade. What for? Is that going to enable a better retirement? Is it going to enable life on your terms? Maybe you and your wife absolutely love this property. You're so enamored with it that we want to keep it for as long as possible.
And that's the hardest decision.
Sure. Yeah. Let's talk about that. But otherwise, simplicity is always better. Simplicity offers maximum flexibility in the future. It gives you high conviction around what you can do moving forward. It'll just give you so much more control in your retirement years. So, unless there was a really screaming reason to retain your current home, I would encourage that. Keep it simple, sell the house, downsize, and then have a reset. And
I think this is an interesting spot for financial advice here. And I mean, we probably say that all the time, but one of the big things about financial advice is the projections that most retirement advisors and most advisors will give you, detailed projections that can help you weigh up the difference between these two and show you exactly what they could look like, try different assumptions, try different growth, try different income. And having that information can actually put you in a position to make a more informed, considered decision rather than having to, very back of the envelope calculations.
Yeah.
I think that can be super powerful.
Yeah, agreed. I'd lastly love we've spoken before about the concept of setting your own walls. Everyone sets their own walls in retirement and indeed in life in terms of what their expenses are. And I remember many years ago having that realization. I had 2 consecutive meetings. The first person I sat down with and said, "What are your plans for the future?" And in a pretty direct way, they said, "I want to own a home in an affluent suburb with a D-shaped driveway and I want to have all of my expensive cars out the front of the driveway. That's my life goal." I said, "Why?" "Because I want to be able to show people that I've succeeded." Wow. Okay. Fair enough. That's your goal. And then the next person, when I sat down with them, their goal was, I just want to be on top of the mortgage repayments. Yeah. That's the number one thing.
That's it.
It's not by coincidence that the person who had a really high income had decided that they wanted the D-shaped driveway, and the person that was financially struggling had decided they wanted to just be at it. They weren't thinking about D-shaped driveways and expensive cars. They were thinking about the basics. No one had to set those goals for them. They naturally set those walls themselves, and everyone has their own Everyone's setting goals based on what they think is realistic. That's human nature. People are quite good at that with their finances. And so as part of that, you're currently living on 120K, but I can't help but wonder if part of that is because you've got that in the back of your mind, like that's what I can afford to live on comfortably. Yeah. If we change the situation to the point where you had $5 million invested intelligently and you already had the home looked after, no debt, you might be surprised to learn that those walls change and the quality of your life goes up significantly. Your retirement becomes more epic because you say, I'm going to travel more. I'm going to have better experiences. I'm
not worry about my offset balance reducing.
That's right. Yeah. So don't underestimate how much better your life can become by simplifying your finances, because you give yourself permission to push those walls out and be braver with some of your big financial decisions.
And I got a good one for you. And this is a Dire Straits reference. Sultan of Swing asks, how to understand dollar cost averaging with Australian Super or any industry fund for that matter that doesn't have unit prices but has a daily return percentage.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay. All right.
I really stumped. Oh, I was good with that one. The Dire Straits, I assume you had that guitar.
Yeah, I did have that leak in my mind. Yeah, that's right. G'day, Sultan of Swing. It could also be Wazam Akram. Wasn't he the Sultan of Swing?
You've always got another one of those. It's
from the top.
Just music.
From the top, we've got when you go online to most industry super funds and indeed a lot of retail funds, but most industry, you will get you'll get a daily return percentage, which means that for those playing along, it will say, for example, on the 1st of January to the 2nd of January, the units for the growth fund, for example, the value of it increased by 0.325%. And then the next day, the 2nd of January to the 3rd of January, it decreased by 0.15231%. And what is really happening there is it's saying the entire pool of assets that we have for the growth fund, because of course, for an industry fund, for example, you're investing in a pooled fund with lots and lots of other members. The value of that entire pool, based on the underlying assets that we invested in, went up by this much or down by that much.
Same as a managed fund, basically.
That's right.
You just don't see it.
Yep. Yeah. Now, I've done this many times before when we're trying to work backward to determine how have you come to be here, particularly if we're looking at strategy A versus strategy B and trying to apply it retrospectively to say if you had have done this in the past, you would be in the advantage. If you open up that daily return percentage graph, which is available for download on all of those sites, it's just one more extension, one more row that you drop on the Excel to basically create a unit price. You don't have to know what the unit price is because it's arbitrary for every fund. Really, the purpose of the unit price above all else is in order to obtain daily return percentages. So then they can say overall over the last month, 3 months, 9 months, here's how the fund has performed. So just set a unit price of 1.00000 at the beginning of the timeline that you want.
And then you can track it.
And then, if the next day the daily unit price went down by 1%, well, then it's going to be 0.99999 or 0.9900, that is in 99, and it'll just flow all the way down and move in line with the daily unit price. So then you can, for mine, I found that to be pretty easy, in that you can easily enough you can make 1.00 the actual dollar amount that you want to contribute or whatever it would be, and then the whole thing runs really smoothly. So
I actually had an interesting episode idea for the 5 best technology tips for retirees. So maybe, one to calculate unit pricing and dollar cost averaging.
Yeah. Or you can do it on Excel and it takes about 60 seconds.
There we go.
But yeah, I'll actually I'll drop this into the show notes. I'll pull open for example, the Australian Super unit pricing we'll just use the growth fund.
Yeah.
And I'll just run a 1 minute loom to explain how you do it. But it's just a really simple formula, and then you can easily convert a return percentage to a unit price. Just as a reminder though, the actual unit price itself is truly irrelevant. It's truly arbitrary in the sense that it's bigger or smaller depending on what date it started. If it started in 2018, it's going to be quite low typically, and if it started in 1994, it's going to be a bigger number. It's really not important other than just to reflect what the performance of the fund is doing.
And the value of every given day.
Yeah,
beautiful.
Simple.
And I'm going to back you with a question here from, I believe this is a MASH reference. We can both answer this question if you're getting a bit tired. Radar O'Reilly.
Oh, that's MASH.
Yeah. All right, I'm getting on top of these.
Yeah.
I've been reading a lot on the weekends just to make sure I'm on top. Radar O'Reilly asks, I'm 61, working part-time and retiring at the end of April 2025. Well done. My husband is also retired, 61. I will earn about $47,000 this year and have about $300,000 in super. And the question is, at what point is it no longer worthwhile making concessional or tax-deductible contributions, given the marginal tax rate for the 16% marginal tax rate starts at $18,200 and finishes at $45,000. So when is it no longer relevant to make a concessional contribution?
Yeah, okay. Hey there, Radar. Or is Walter his real name in MASH?
I reckon Mon knows. Beyond that, Mon
Mon is shaking her head do not involve me in this conversation. I've never seen you look so apprehensive.
Thanks for the bailout.
Yeah, goodness. All right.
Well, I'll find that out while you're answering this question.
Look at us working together.
Yeah.
All right. So yes, you will earn about 47K, 300K in super. So you can make these contributions. Now you've made a point here that
Walter Eugene.
Yeah. Okay. So you made a point that pre-tax contributions will be 15% into the fund,
Contributions
of course.
tax, yeah.
All things being equal, fair enough.
And your fund deducts that for you. I think it's worth keeping in mind. We don't get an invoice for that.
Correct, yeah. Which is only just under, or just greater, or just under the 16% tax rate, which is the tax band from $18,200 to $45,000. Firstly, you're forgetting the Medicare levy because it is 15% into the super fund, a pure flat 15%. But when you pay tax on this, you're not paying it at 16, you're paying it at 18 because it's 16 plus a 2% Medicare levy. So the delta here is not 1, it's 3. So for example, if we were looking at an amount of, let's say $20,000, just random number, and that would take your taxable income from 47 down to 27, and ignoring the fact that the benefit is actually meaningful for that it's bigger for the first $2,000 because at 45,000 it goes up to 30% plus the 2% Medicare levy, 32 total. So even if we just assumed that the whole thing was 18, we have $20,000 either being taxed at 15% or alternatively being taxed at 18%. That's a 3% differential. So for me, that's $600. Yeah, $600
pretty good.
From a $47,000 income. Absolutely, I want to use all of that.
So you're only losing out if you're below the tax-free threshold.
That's
really.
right. Yeah,
losing out.
Yeah. If you can deduct down below 18,200, then yeah, you shouldn't be making any concessional contributions to super, generally speaking, because you're better just making them as non-concessional contributions and paying no tax on the way in at all. So in answer to your question, yes, it's still worthwhile doing. And now this is an each to their own. You might be lucky enough to look at this and say, look, $600, that's not such a big deal to me. So I'll give that a miss. All right, sure. That's your call. Bear in mind though, that that's the first $600. If you're earning $47,000 this financial year, there might also be other options available. We've got spouse contributions. We've got government co-contributions. We've got a number of other options that we could take advantage of to potentially get another $1,000 or more. So if we can,
every dollar counts.
Yeah, on a $47,000 income, if we can save, let's say, $1,500 to $2,000 in tax, for me, that's a huge win.
Massive win.
Yeah. So so yes, it is still worth doing. Don't forget about that pesky little Medicare levy that sits on the side. All right. Not a long question, but this is going to give you some thought. So it's going to puzzle your puzzle.
I reckon it'll be our last one for the day too.
I listen to all your podcasts and appreciate what you do. This is from Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, and if you do not know this reference, I'm leaving. I'm just calling it right now and walking out the damn door.
Mary Poppins.
Oh, brilliant. Okay.
One? Yeah. All right, we got that one.
Okay.
I was actually trying to say this today. I was going for a walk with my partner. She's like, I can't say anything today. So I said supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. It didn't work. It didn't help.
It didn't helk. Unbelievable. Well, you should have asked her this question then. That was what you were supposed to do. I listen to all your podcasts, appreciate what you do. In the news lately is a financial advisor who stole $1 million from his clients. He's going to jail. Bye, Felicia. As an individual, how do you ensure you protect yourself from fraudulent actions by a financial advisor? It's a good question.
Yeah, I think, and this is so important. I think you've done one about financial scams, but that doesn't always. That's a lot of that can be phishing and all the other kind of things that come in your email, not necessarily financial advice. And this is incredibly important, but incredibly difficult to answer. Unfortunately, and there's always a disclaimer here that most of the people that are doing this aren't registered financial advisors. So it's always difficult to put in there. But in most cases, they were at some point, and that's why they're in such significant trouble. I think the biggest thing to understand here is why this person, and I don't really want to put the name out there or anything. It's been in the media anyway. Why this person is going to jail. And it's because they were advising and setting up payments from clients, self-managed super funds, into companies which he owned, controlled, and was investing or using the proceeds for. Yeah. It's, you can't even call it a Ponzi or a pyramid because it wasn't actually it wasn't paying out anyway. It's literally just I think it's just fraud is what he's being charged for, basically. And there's some very simple things we can say to people to help avoid these. And I think and we've both got pretty similar approaches. The first thing I'll say is a lot of these are driven by whether it's advertising or people being interested in making quick money. And advisors selling themselves on, great returns. I'm always wary of selling our business on returns or low costs. Essentially, you get what you pay for. In probably the biggest example. So it's all about, one is always making sure that your advisor is on ASIC's financial advice register. I'm pretty sure we have a link to that in every show note that we put out. If not, we'll put a link in this episode as well. So to be a practicing financial advisor, to be able to provide personal advice to retail clients, which is most of the population, you have to be on the financial advice register. That's always the first place to check. Another big one, and I'm going to welcome you as on the third one, I think. Another big one is, and I say this all the time, it's an outsourcing, it's a third-party relationship when you're going to meet a financial advisor. You should never be transferring money outside of the cost of the advice directly to your financial advisor.
Oh, yeah.
Any transfer you're making in investment should and will always be in your own name. With every financial advisor, it will be in your entity name or in your own name. The accounts will be open for you, and you should not be transferring large sums of money to your financial advisor's bank account to then facilitate transfers. That's one of the things that scares me, and I say in every first or second meeting. I think that's always the giveaway. Once that money's gone, you've lost control of it. You've got no transparency over it anymore.
I agree. I think, Dan, and just to add to that too, I think one of the biggest problems with the concept of a financial advisor scam is that a lot of people, when they go to see a financial advisor, have not done it before. They go in without preconceived expectations. And so if an advisor just very coolly and calmly says, yeah, well, that's all good. Just so make out a check for, a couple $100,000 and make it out to ABC, and I'll take that and I'll go and invest it. Or can you pay the money? People just assume that that's what everyone else is doing. So I'll just get that knocked over for you. And it's, if you're unfamiliar with the process, that's fine. A lot of people are going to be unfamiliar with advice for the first time, but you really should be leaning into, where is this money getting paid? And from, as far as I'm concerned, the moment that, if we're taking a direct debit, for example, from a member's account in order to set up an investment or something, they should have visibility on that transfer the moment it hits the account, the second it does, and they should have online access, and not just me sending them reports once a month or a quarter saying here's how it's going. And I think that's the platform discussion in a lot of cases, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And that's one, the platforms, there's a lot of opinions, both from advisors and from the public on platforms. So using a superannuation platform like Colonial First State or Hub24 or NetWealth, yes, there's a cost of using a platform, but it actually offers a level of protection. If you're using a platform to invest your superannuation assets, any investment those assets go into has to be approved by that platform. So it acts as this kind of filter. I'd use another word before it. But in this case, those investments would never have been allowed to be made via the platform. So not saying that people that don't use platforms are more prone to this. It just opens the potential. If you're investing everything directly, there's a lot of manual paperwork. Naturally, there's less level of security and less safeguards around that.
Now, there's lots of really, just on that note of when we talk about platforms, we're talking about an investment company, for example, that will allow you to have all of your assets held on that company, and you can see it and you can engage. So what are the popular ones? BT Panorama, Macquarie, we've got Hub24, NetWealth,
North.
AMP North. that you should have full access, full login access to be able to see what's going on here. And you also should be able to speak with reps external to your financial advisor. So you should be able to call that company, whether, for example, it's NetWealth, and speak to a representative at NetWealth that is in no way affiliated with your financial advisor and say, what's my balance? Can I confirm that I've logged in? This is what does that look right to you? All of those key things. And this is one of the problems with investing off platform. And as you said, it often happens when a financial advisor might have promised really high returns. Hey, there's this really bespoke investment which no one's heard of that's doing these crazy things, and here's a prospectus, and here's some flyers about it. Sounds too good to be true, and everyone says, "Yep, great, let's get into this." Probably is. That's right.
I think there's a good reason that cold calling, or I think anti-hawking provisions is what they call it. Traditionally, a lot of these scams came from cold calling, aggressive into a single product, and that's been outlawed at the moment. So if you're being approached and hard sold on making changes to your superannuation or your investments, that's always something to look out for as well.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So just let's executive summary here, because it's just such a big question. It's so important. So number one thing, type into Google financial advice or advisor register, and you'll get a link that comes up through MoneySmart. It's also in the show notes. We'll drop it in the show notes. Yeah. And from there, you can type in the financial advisor's name, and it will tell you if they are currently registered. Yeah. It will also, underneath, if you scroll down a little bit, it'll say if they've got any banning or disqualifications. It'll tell if in the past they've had any issues with professional development and any blemishes to their record. So as a starting point, go there. And I'm sorry to anyone who's unlucky enough to have had a blemish and there was a very legitimate reason for that. But if there is any blemish on the advisor's record, as far as I'm concerned, no more bets. Just don't. And if they're not there, more of the same. A financial advisor is on that record, is on that register, period. No exceptions. If they're not there, run for the hills. And then thereafter, when you're engaging with their company, an obvious question is, who is your licensee? And then what professional indemnity insurance do you have, or what cover do we have here to make sure that in a worst case scenario where you either invest my money and it goes bad, or alternatively that the money's just not invested and something goes bad, what recourse is available, and understanding that really well can serve.
Yeah, knowing how to get to the financial ombudsman service, because all these things should be outlined in a financial services guide, but the problem is that in most cases they probably aren't. That's why they're fraudulent and some level of scam. So maybe got time for one last short question.
Depends who's asking it. Depends who's answering it.
A beautiful question for you. And this one is talking about investment property and residential property. Again, it seems to be a pretty popular topic for, I think, Melbourne, Sydney, and people nearing retirement. So investment properties outside of superannuation. My wife and I bought a property in Melbourne off the plan to start our journey in the SMSF world in 2020. So they bought a residential property, investment property in their SMSF. When's the best time to sell a property in an SMSF to realise a maximum gain? I'm not going to say any performance of that property. I know. All right. I'm not asking you to be a real estate agent. All right.
So hello, what's the name? Property Bear. Okay.
Which is strange. You don't want to be a property bear leveraging into property.
Think about like a warm fuzzy bear.
Yeah, right.
Life's
a happy
good.
One.
Yeah. A happy property bear. Okay. So every property is its own asset. And of course, if you've listened to some of the great podcasts on property through the Rask network, then you would know that every different, there's not, property in Australia is not just one asset. It's the performance of property in Australia varies wildly depending on where it is, the situation of that unique property. And so what that does mean is that this is highly situational. You might be in an area right now where we're likely to see flat or negative growth over the next 1 to 5 years. Or you could be in an area where you'd be insane to let it go because there's a huge amount of growth, or a very healthy likelihood of a huge amount of growth in the coming years. So the best time to sell a property to realize a maximum gain, of course, is when the property has had a good run and it doesn't look like there's much more run available for that property to have, which happens in all different cycles. And the way that you would typically determine that is by engaging with a buyer's agent, by paying them a fee and ideally a national buyer's agent, someone that has reach across the entire country. And I say that because the benefit of a national buyer's agent is they can give you a relative answer, not just like if I only work in Melbourne or in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, then I can say hold or not, but I'm not contextualizing it versus what other markets are doing. I'm just looking at this one. So you would, and I have in the past, paid a fee to a buyer's agent to say, hey, can you do a review of my portfolio? What do these properties look like? Do we keep them? Which one? And if we're going to look to let them go, when would we start to let some of these properties go in order to try to find better opportunities? Now, if you've got a property here that's in a self-managed super fund, haven't referenced your age, but one of the key things here is not just about maximizing gains, but also minimizing tax. And so Property Bear could be 63 years old, for example, and looking to sell right now. Well, if you have been fortunate enough to make a really good gain inside your self-managed superannuation fund on that property, might be best to wait 2 more years until you can set up an allocated pension, because then when you do sell the property, odds on you are likely to pay no tax on that property. And then, of course, it's not just like maximum gain is also going to be because you minimize tax. So sometimes you'll be best holding a property in an SMSF all the way until you have retired or met a condition of release, and other times that's too far away. Luckily, in most cases, here you'd be paying 10% tax on the property from a capital gains perspective in the super environment, so that's not huge. Now, all of that said, I would love to add one more little thing here, because I have just run the numbers on buying a property in an SMSF right now. And
this could be for a detailed episode too.
It is. We are going to do this on a Rask podcast through the Australian Finance podcast. But for my numbers are abundantly clear here that it is very, very, very hard, incredibly hard to make money buying a property through a self-managed super fund today. And the reasons are numerous, but the biggest thing overall is that we're paying really high rates of interest. The loans that we don't have as many options as we had before. Commensurately, your interest rates are often late 6s, early 7s in terms of how much you'll be paying to hold that loan. I've seen SMSF loans at 8.5%, which is unfortunately far too erosive on the return. You will be better just leaving your money in a traditional retail or industry fund and investing it in a growth or high growth allocation. So yes, property, we always talk about investment properties outside of super. One of the reasons for me personally that I don't harp on buying properties inside of super is because I'm really adamant on this. In almost all cases, the numbers don't stack up. The exception to this would be if it's business real property. We've previously spoken on podcasts about you might have a factory that you're looking to buy because you already rent your property, or your business already rents this particular factory, and you know it's up for sale, and you could own it and have the simplicity of owning the asset and a couple of other benefits. In that scenario, it might stack up, maybe, but as a house rule, financially, it's not going to in the current climate. So for those of you that are looking at taking control of your super and setting up a self-managed super fund so that you can buy a property here, this in the current climate is extremely buyer beware. I don't think it stacks up.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into that one. So that's a perfect time to wrap up another episode of the Australian Retirement Podcast. I love all the questions coming through. I think how broad they are, and please keep them anonymous and not too detailed. We have to pull them back a little bit. You have to be very careful for navigating that line of general versus personal advice. So keep sending them through via the YouTube channel, via our websites, emails, and thanks again for joining me, James.
Pleasure. Thanks, mate. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.